The sound of tires screeching on asphalt was the last thing I expected to hear as I stood outside my home. In a flash, the world turned upside down, and I found myself lying on the ground, groceries scattered around me, my body screaming in pain. I had been hit by a car, and as I struggled to comprehend what had just happened, I realized the car was driven by none other than my mother-in-law, Linda. Later in the hospital, as I lay in bed nursing my injuries, the phone rang. It was Mark, my husband, sounding frantic. "Anna, you need to tell the police you just fell. They're saying someone saw Mom hit you with the car. Can you believe it?" His words hit me harder than the car. Not only had Linda run me over, but now Mark and his parents were trying to cover it up. As I listened to Mark's rambling excuses, my mind raced back to the days when our marriage seemed like a dream. We had met at the office, where he was assigned to mentor me. Mark was never the charming type, but over time, his steady presence and attention won me over. However, the fairy tale soon turned grim after our wedding. I quit my job and moved into his parents' house, a decision I soon regretted. Living with Linda and her husband George was a constant battle. Linda, with her sharp tongue and unyielding ways, made sure to remind me daily of my duties as a homemaker. "You should be grateful to Mark," she would say, her voice dripping with condescendence. "You're living a comfortable life because of him." George, though not as vocal as Linda, had his way of belittling me with his old-fashioned views on women. My relationship with Mark deteriorated as he increasingly sided with his parents. Any attempt to discuss our issues was met with indifference or blame. "They are old, you need to be more understanding," he would dismissively say. Our hopes of having children faded with each passing year, further straining our relationship. The pressure from Linda and George about grandchildren was relentless. Yet Mark remained indifferent, absorbed in his own world. Sarah, my neighbor, and her husband David were my only solace. They knew the real story behind the picture-perfect facade of my marriage. Sarah, having gone through her own struggles, became a confidant and a source of strength. As I lay in the hospital bed, reflecting on these memories, Mark's voice brought me back to reality. "Anna, you need to do this for us, for the family," he pleaded over the phone. But something within me had snapped. No longer could I be the submissive wife, the victim of their twisted family dynamics. I hung up the phone, a sense of determination building within me. They had crossed a line, and it was time for them to face the consequences. I was going to fight back. This was not just about me anymore. It was about standing up against the injustice that had governed my life for far too long. In the sterile calm of the hospital room, my thoughts were a turbulent storm. I grappled with the pain, not just from my injuries, but from the betrayal of those I once called family. As the sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor, Sarah walked in, her face etched with concern. "Anna, how are you feeling?" Sarah asked, sitting beside my bed. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes betrayed her anger. "I've been better," I replied, trying to muster a smile. "What did the police say?" Sarah's expression hardened. "They initially bought the accidental fall story, but I told them what I saw. Linda driving out of the garage like a bat out of hell, right before I found you on the ground." I clenched my fists, anger boiling within me. "Mark wants me to lie, to protect them." She reached out, squeezing my hand. "You can't let them get away with this, Anna. It's not just about the accident, it's years of manipulation and control. This is your chance to break free." Her words resonated with me. For years I had endured Linda's demeaning comments and George's dismissive attitude, always with Mark's passive compliance. It was a cycle of control and humiliation, a never-ending test of my patience and resilience. As Sarah and I talked, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan not just for justice, but for retribution. It was time Linda and her family faced the consequences of their actions. The next day, a police officer came to take my statement. I recounted the events leading up to the accident, the pain, the betrayal, and Mark's desperate plea to cover it up. The officer listened intently, jotting down notes. "We have enough to bring them in for questioning," he said after I finished. "We'll need to investigate further, but your testimony is crucial." I nodded, a sense of empowerment washing over me. This was more than just a legal process. It was the first step in reclaiming my life. As the days passed, my resolve only grew stronger. Sarah visited regularly, updating me on the investigation's progress. She spoke of how the community was rallying around me, offering support and expressing their outrage at Linda's actions. I also learned that David had been reviewing footage from their home security camera, which faced our driveway. He was hopeful it might have captured something useful. This news sparked a glimmer of hope in me. If we could prove Linda intentionally hit me, it would be the undeniable evidence we needed. With each passing day, my physical strength returned, but it was the growing sense of justice that truly healed me. I was no longer the silent sufferer, enduring in the shadows. I was a woman wronged, ready to fight back and expose the vile nature of those who had oppressed me. The small room at the police station felt colder than usual as I waited for the detective. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cocktail of anger and anticipation. The door opened, and Detective Martinez walked in, his expression serious. "We've reviewed the footage from your neighbor's security camera," he began, placing a file on the table. "It clearly shows Linda's car hitting you. It's unmistakable." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a burning desire for justice. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're bringing them in for questioning today. Your husband, too. They'll have to answer for this," Detective Martinez replied. As I left the police station, a plan was forming in my head. It wasn't enough for them to be merely exposed. They had to feel the weight of their actions. Later that day, Sarah called me with an update. "The police took Linda, George, and Mark for questioning. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. They can't believe what Linda did." The news spread like wildfire, igniting a mixture of shock and disdain from those who had once respected the family. But for me, it was a vindication of years of silent suffering. I lay in my hospital bed that night, imagining Linda's face as she was confronted with her actions. The once formidable woman, now cornered by her own deceit. It was a scene I had played out in my mind countless times, each replay a small victory. But it was not just Linda who needed to face the music. Mark's betrayal was a wound that cut deep. He had chosen his parents over me, over truth and decency. He had to understand the gravity of his choice. I was discharged from the hospital a few days later, my body still aching, but my spirit unbroken. Sarah and David were waiting for me, their faces a mix of concern and determination. "Anna, we're with you in this. Whatever you need," David said, his voice firm. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of solidarity I hadn't felt in years. That evening, as I sat in Sarah's living room, we watched the news. The story of my accident and the ensuing investigation had made the local headlines. Linda, George, and Mark's faces were plastered across the screen, their reputations tarnished. It was a surreal moment, seeing my private turmoil turned public spectacle. But there was no sympathy in my heart for them. This was the beginning of their downfall, a downfall they had brought upon themselves. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was thick with tension. Linda, George, and Mark sat across from me, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. Detective Martinez sat beside me, his presence a reassuring reminder of the justice system at work. "You understand why you're here," Detective Martinez began, addressing the trio. "The evidence is clear. Linda, you hit Anna with your car and then fled the scene. George, you were a witness and chose to stay silent. And Mark, you tried to cover it all up." Linda's face was a mask of defiance, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "It was an accident," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "I never meant to hit her." George remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table, while Mark's face was flushed with embarrassment and guilt. "Mom, why didn't you just stop? Why did you run?" Mark's voice cracked, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. I looked at them, my heart hardened by years of mistreatment. "You could have killed me, Linda, and all you cared about was saving yourselves." Linda's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared, I panicked," she sobbed. George finally spoke, his voice low. "We were wrong. We never should have lied." Detective Martinez turned to Mark. "And you, Mark, you tried to manipulate the story, even asking your wife to lie for you. How do you justify that?" Mark's response was barely audible. "I don't know. I wanted to protect my parents." I felt a surge of disgust and pity for Mark. He had chosen his parents' side over truth and justice over his own wife. "You didn't just betray me, Mark. You betrayed everything we ever had," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The detective nodded, his expression solemn. "You will all face charges for your actions. This is a serious matter." As we left the room, I felt a sense of closure. They had been exposed for who they truly were. Linda, a coward hiding behind her tears, George, a silent accomplice to his wife's crime, and Mark, a son so blinded by loyalty that he lost sight of what was right. The world outside seemed different as I stepped out of the police station. I had confronted my past, and now it was time to build my future. The air felt fresher, the sky more open. I was free from the chains of Linda and Mark's oppressive control. Sarah and David were waiting for me, their faces a mix of concern and pride. "You were incredible in there," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for their unwavering support. In the following weeks, the legal proceedings against Linda, George, and Mark began. The news of their arraignment spread through our community, eliciting mixed reactions. Some expressed shock, others disappointment, but for me, it was a validation of my struggles. During this time, I stayed with Sarah and David. They provided not just a roof over my head, but a nurturing environment that allowed me to heal. Their kindness was a stark contrast to the years of cold indifference I had experienced with Mark and his parents. One evening, as we sat in Sarah's living room, David broke the news. "The prosecutor's office called. Linda and George are looking at significant charges, Mark too for his part in the cover-up." I nodded, feeling a bittersweet sense of satisfaction. They were finally facing the consequences of their actions. "But what about you, Anna?" Sarah asked, her eyes full of concern. "What will you do now?" I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I'm filing for divorce. I can't be with someone who chose his parents over me, even in a situation as grave as this." Sarah squeezed my hand, her support unspoken but deeply felt. The divorce proceedings were swift, largely due to Mark's guilt and the overwhelming evidence against him. I received a significant settlement, a small consolation for the years of emotional turmoil. With the settlement, I decided to start anew. I rented a small apartment, modest but mine alone. It was a fresh start, a place where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. Sarah and David were instrumental in this new chapter of my life. David, who owned a small business, offered me a job. "You've got skills and experience, Anna. We'd be lucky to have you," he said, his offer genuine and heartfelt. I accepted, eager to reclaim my independence and step into a world I had been shut out from for so long. As I settled into my new job and life, I found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for years. Working alongside Sarah and David, I rediscovered parts of myself that I had long forgotten. I was no longer the downtrodden wife of Mark, but Anna, a woman with her own identity and strength. Months had passed since the trial began, and the day of the verdict finally arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, I felt a sense of finality. Linda, George, and Mark sat on the other side, their faces etched with anxiety and regret. The judge's voice echoed in the solemn room. "In light of the evidence presented, this court finds Linda and George guilty of hit-and-run and obstruction of justice. Mark is found guilty of aiding in the cover-up." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge pronounced the sentences. Linda and George received prison sentences, while Mark was given community service and probation. Their faces crumbled as the reality of their situation sank in. After the verdict, I stood outside the courthouse, the sun warming my face. Sarah and David joined me, their presence a comforting reminder of the support that had carried me through. "Justice has been served," Sarah said, her voice tinged with relief. "Yes, but at what cost?" I mused, reflecting on the years lost and the pain endured. The news of their sentencing spread quickly. Linda, once a respected figure in our community, was now a convicted felon. George, her silent accomplice, shared her fate. And Mark, my once beloved husband, was reduced to a man who had betrayed his wife to protect his deceitful parents. In the weeks that followed, I felt a shift in myself. The weight of the past began to lift, and in its place grew a sense of empowerment. My life, once defined by the shadows of Linda and Mark's control, was now mine to shape. Working at David's company brought new challenges and joys. I thrived in the environment, my confidence growing with each passing day. Sarah, ever the supportive friend, was by my side, encouraging me to embrace this new chapter. But the greatest change came when I least expected it. At a company event, I met Thomas, a colleague of David's. He was kind, respectful, and most importantly, he saw me for who I was, not for my past. Our friendship blossomed into romance, and within a year, we were married. It was a simple ceremony, a celebration of new beginnings and healed hearts. Thomas knew of my past, of the pain and betrayal, but it only strengthened our bond. As I stood by Thomas's side, looking into his loving eyes, I realized that this was what true partnership looked like. It was built on mutual respect, support, and understanding, everything my marriage to Mark lacked. A year had passed since the trial, and life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Thomas and I had moved into a cozy house, a place we could truly call our own. The scars of my past with Linda, George, and Mark had begun to fade, replaced by the love and contentment that filled my days. One evening, as Thomas and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with a gentle smile. "You know, Anna, I admire your strength. What you went through, it's unimaginable, but here you are, stronger and happier." I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. "I couldn't have done it without friends like Sarah and David. And without you," I replied, my heart full of gratitude. Our conversation drifted to the future, to dreams and plans yet to unfold. The pain and drama of the past were no longer chains that held me back, but stepping stones that had led me to this moment of tranquility. Occasionally I would hear news of Linda, George, and Mark. Linda and George were serving their sentences, a consequence of their actions that they had to live with every day. Mark, on the other hand, had struggled to rebuild his life. The community's knowledge of his betrayal had left him isolated and remorseful. Though I had moved on, there was a part of me that found a bitter satisfaction in their downfall. They had reaped what they had sown, a fitting karma for their deeds. As I reflected on my journey, I realized that my story was one of transformation. I had gone from being a victim of manipulation and deceit to a woman who stood up for herself, fought for justice, and reclaimed her life. Now, surrounded by love and support, I was ready to face whatever the future held. The challenges and heartaches of my past had shaped me, but they no longer defined me. I was Anna, a survivor, a woman who had found her happiness despite the odds. The story of my past would always be a part of me, but it was the story of my present and future that I was most excited to write. A story of love, resilience, and newfound joy.